Hello and welcome. My name is Danielle Stein-Fairhurst from Plum Solutions, and I am your instructor for the FMI Level 1 Advanced Financial Modeler FMI exam prep course. So if you are planning to take this exam and you have done the prep course with Plum Solutions, the final stage of that is that 2 weeks prior to the real exam, we will together sit a mock exam under exam conditions that are as close as possible to what it's really going to be like on exam day. So if you have sat the exam and got your results back from the mock examiner, I thought what we could do is just go through some of the most common issues that people had on the exam, and that will help you when you get to the real thing. People say that this is probably the best thing that you can do to get ready, because when you're in an unfamiliar environment, when you're stressed, it really just takes the pressure off if you can just go through the process under mock exam conditions. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, the exam that we did together for this mock exam, now this is probably a particularly difficult one. Now there are a number of different variables that you might get. I mean, generally this exam is you pretty much know what you're going to get. There's usually fixed and variable debt. In this case, there was both. There is usually perhaps common shares, perhaps preferred shares. In this case, there was both. And in this exam, there was also a minimum cash balance, which you do sometimes get. You rarely get all of those things. But in this mock exam, we just really wanted to test you and make sure that you are absolutely ready for exam day. So most of real exams that I've seen have really only got one or two of these complexities, but this one was quite difficult. So just a few things that you need to know is that you do need to read the instructions very, very carefully. Make sure that you save the file, save it onto the hard drive of the computer that you're working on. Change the name of the file. You should have your candidate ID. That needs to go on the front page. You do need to include a table of contents. One of the things that we go through on the course is how to set the model up. That's really easy marks, is making sure that you have all of the structure right, setting up for print, making sure, thinking about whether it's landscape or portrait style, separating the assumptions and the scenarios. So what we do in the course is rehearse, how to set everything up. So those sorts of things are going to save you a huge amount of time on the day. So what we find in this case, a lot of the students don't do this, but I know that that this is a common problem, that it's not set up properly. Make sure that the logic or the layout of the file is logical, so that when you have the financial statements, that shouldn't be in between the schedules. So if you're doing a horizontal layout, it should be logically in the order in which you work on it. Make sure that you have a column for the units, so that's really important. Also have different colors, so blue for input, black for calculation, and green for links. It doesn't absolutely have, there's no, that's a generally accepted practice, but as long as you have some consistency throughout the model, and perhaps even a legend to show that those are what the inputs that you've used throughout the model, do make sure that you've added a footer as well. Some of these things are perhaps not what you would put in a real model. I very rarely use a footer in a model, but that is a requirement that is very clearly laid out by FMI, is that you do need to have a certain sort of layout. So let's talk about the assumptions. We did find that a lot of people have had a lot of trouble separating the assumptions and the calculation. So that is something that often quite a few people got that picked up by the mock examiner. A lot of people had the calculations were were done on the assumptions page, or they actually put the assumptions into the schedule. So make sure they're clearly laid out. So the assumptions tab is for the inputs only, and the calculations are done on the schedule. So that's something to be careful of. You may lose a couple of, I don't think you would fail just because of a few of those, but that is something that you may lose a couple of marks on. Make sure that that the linking and formatting of the assumptions is done on each page. One of the things that the mock examiner mentioned was that you could, when you're calculating the working capital and you need to put in the number of days, so you know when is a leap year, and we could just hard code it, or you could perhaps use a date function to calculate the number of dates between the number of days in each year. That's something that you might consider. Probably one of the hardest parts of this model is the working capital questions. So yeah, actually there's a couple of ways of doing it. You can actually calculate the historical working capital days and then hard code those assumed days into the future. That's typically, and that's how we do it on the course. You may choose to do it slightly differently. There was a few people made a couple of mistakes when you were sizing the accounts receivable, whether it was against the gross revenue or the net revenue. So that's something to be a little bit careful of. There's not, if you've when you enter when you register for the exam, they will send you a number of different example models. So you'll see that there are so many different ways to pass this exam. There's vertical, there's horizontal, there's different layouts and things like that. But I have, in the course, we go through the way that I think is the easiest and the most logical, but there are multiple ways to pass this exam. So what I would recommend is that you figure out the way that is most logical to you, that makes the most sense to you, and then just do that on the day. You don't want to be trying anything new on the day. You want to just rehearse it and be able to just go from start to finish. So just a couple of other points. Make sure that the tax or the equity doesn't go below zero. So you could perhaps use, if you think that's going to happen, you could perhaps use a max formula to say, the maximum amount between that number and zero, and that will make sure that it doesn't go below zero. Make sure, if you run out of time, I mean, the main reason that people fail this exam is because they simply run out of time because they're not prepared. So you need to at least set up the layout. So what we do in the course is to make sure that you've set everything up way in advance, and then you literally are just filling in the blanks. That is the best way of doing it, because if you submit a half-built model, there is absolutely no way that you can pass this qualification. So if there is a piece missing, you'll simply fail. However, if you're able to at least set up all the schedules and set up all the summaries, set up all of the scenarios, and even if you're missing a few pieces, you might pass, but you won't pass if you don't have a complete model. So just make sure that you have at least set up the layout. That's probably my number one tip for passing this exam. Just a couple of points on the debt schedule. The debt's probably the most complex piece, probably the thing that you need to spend the most time on. It's there's quite a few moving parts with the debt, so make sure that you have rehearsed how to build the debt, and the revolver is quite tricky. Make sure the interest on the cash, so cash interest is cash in, not cash out. So sorry, the other way around, it should be deducted, not added in there. So just make sure you get that one around the right way. If there is a minimum cash balance, just make sure that you know how to calculate that. It's simply just a formula that you put around the minimum cash balance. So if there is preference shares, you may need to add in a line for net income to common, so just consider that. I won't give too much away on that one, but if you have received the feedback from the mock examiner, I'm sure that is clear to you. And lastly, using a macro or a circular reference. So when you get that problem of the interest calculation, of course the interest paid is going to drive the P&L and the income statement, and that is going to drive the cash, and the cash is going to drive the debt, and you end up with a circular reference, which is of course a very common problem in financial models. So you can either do a circular reference, which is technically allowed, or you can, the way that I have taught in the course is using a macro. There's a few, and I did actually get some feedback directly from FMI about the use of macros or circular references in debt calculations. So they say that you can use the macro. That's totally fine, and that's my preferred method because I really don't like circular references. They say they prefer circular references, so there you go. You can go ahead and use a circular reference if you like. My models, you probably will not see a circular reference in it though. Or you could use beginning or average debt balances. I mean, that's another way of doing it, and that would get around it. That's not as accurate, but as I say, you do get full marks. So a couple of options there for you. But I've got to stress, these are decisions that you have to make in advance. You don't want to be making decisions like this on the fly. So you want to be prepared for which way you're going to go with this. So it's not something you want to be making the decision on the day. So as I mentioned, preferred dividends, adding a row for that one, and you may want to use the mid-year convention for the preferred dividend. So assuming that it's paid part of the way through the year. And lastly, the scenarios and summaries, just make sure that you've rehearsed a couple of ratios that you want to put on there. The scenarios, I know a lot of people like to do the drop-down scenarios. That's probably my preferred method, but you do need to show the summaries for all three scenarios side by side. So when you get the completed, on the real exam, when you get your results, this is what it will look like. They will mark certain areas. So overall impression, design, so how it looks overall, the design and presentation. So, is it easy to follow? Is the layout good? The tab structure, so the worksheets tab organized logically. The financial statements, of course, having the balance sheet balanced. That's really important. I have heard stories of people who've had a balance sheet that hasn't balanced and they've still passed, but that is really unusual and highly unlikely. If you have absolutely everything totally perfect and you've made one tiny little mistake, they may not fail you. But your balance sheet really does need to balance. That's quite important. So if it's really about, how many different mistakes you make. And I'm not really sure. They do not disclose what each of these areas are, what they're not all equally weighted. So we don't know, which of those are important or not. And you'll get either a pass, a near, or a fail. So it might look something like this, where you've got a couple of nears, but you'll still pass overall. So financial statements, the model schedules are really important. So that's about the calculations. And then lastly, of course, the constructions. So, is it, are the correct tools used? So is everything linked properly? Is it a good model? That sort of thing. So lastly, just a couple of questions, just some fairly just a few questions that people have asked me recently. Where can I get more practice practice examples. I mean, you will be sent several exams from FMI when you register. There is the Henderson case, which we go through in the exam. There's an additional mock exam that we do during the Plum course, and then this new mock exam that I'm talking about now. So there's 2 mock exams that you get as part of the Plum course, and as well as all of the Henderson case and all of the other cases that you get from FMI when you register. There is also a mini exam from FMI that you can that's free to access. Then there's also a warm-up case from the Financial Modelling World Cup. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. If you have completed the mock exam, well done. That is probably one of the best ways of being absolutely sure that you are completely ready to get this qualification that is just going to be fantastic for your career. Good luck, and I hope you do really, really well. Happy modelling.